G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to share with you what I've found to be the hidden underlying cause of the common stitch. And I think the stitch is a really interesting topic of conversation because we tend to lump stitches in with things like cramping, and that we tend to have some understanding of what their cause might be. But based on what I find clinically, I think we're missing a big foundational piece of that puzzle that genuinely explains why we get them in the first place. So what I want to go through in this video is I want to talk to you about what I'm finding to be that hidden underlying cause of stitches, and then show you a really simple exercise that you can do to hopefully fix that so that you don't have to have stitches anymore. When we look at something like cramping, we tend to have these obvious things that we pin cramping to. And they can tend to be like a lack of conditioning, they can be dehydration, it can be a lack of electrolytes, it can be not having stretched. But what I tend to find with cramping, and obviously with stitches, is that it doesn't tell me exactly why a specific area becomes a problem. So in terms of cramping, if somebody's calf cramps, being dehydrated, lacking electrolytes, not having stretched, don't necessarily tell me why that specific calf muscle has become a dysfunctional area, and not everything at the same time, because we know that dehydration and electrolytes and heat and all this sort of stuff, they affect the whole body. It's not like your calf is specifically dehydrated more than your other calf is, or more than your hamstring is. So there has to be a hidden reason beyond all of this that we've been missing for so long, that I've covered in a previous video, obviously, and I won't sort of rehash that same thing again today. But when we're looking at the cause of stitches, when we're talking about conditioning and breathing patterns and all these other sorts of things, whether you ate something before you ran, these don't necessarily give me enough information to understand why a specific part of your body became a problem, because we generally get a stitch on one side and not both sides. So there has to be some tangible reason for why one side was fine and the other side became a stitch for you when you were exercising. It's really important to take a step back and look at everything as a whole. And what I'm finding clinically, and what I think is potentially a groundbreaking discovery for anyone who's dealing with stitches all the time, is that generally from what I find, a stitch has something to do with the state of the base of your thoracic spine and rib cage. And by that I mean, you are harboring some hidden stiffnesses, some muscular tightnesses, some tissue that's already overloaded before you go for that run. Then a stitch, from what I sort of understand and what I'm finding, is your body's muscular reaction to that already overloaded area. Now, it's really important because it sort of brings up this idea that a stitch is generally caused or is set up to be there long before you even set off for some exercise. So for example, if you're finding you tend to get a stitch quite often at the front here, if we're to look at what that connects to around the back, what I'm finding is there'll be a section of your spine and potentially the base of a rib cage on that same side, or at least at that same level, that is asking that tissue to spasm and to tense up on your behalf. And by reducing that restriction and that stiffness and tightness, we're taking away potentially one of the foundational causes of why that stitch is there in the first place for you, that all of the other things that we tend to focus on may not be doing. Now, this isn't to say that there isn't some nutritional reasons for this or some other systemic reasons going on as well. But what I'm trying to sort of get across here is that I tend to find that those broader issues tend to be more of a thing that exposes some hidden dysfunction rather than creating that. To get to the point of this video, I want to show you a really, really simple exercise that I would advise anyone to do who gets stitches, just to see what impact that has on your dysfunction. And please let me know in the comments down below if this section of your back that we're going to get the ball into in a second is actually stiff, tight, or tender on the same side or the opposite side. Because again, if you're a fan of the channel, you'll understand that we don't necessarily want to lump you into left and right. We want to think of you as a whole. So even if you get a stitch on the left-hand side, that doesn't automatically mean that your rib cage around the back is stiff on the same side. It may actually be the opposite side, which is another step removed, but still causing a chain reaction of events that's asking that front section or that deep section in your abdomen to tighten up and to feel like a stitch. So what I want to get you to do here is I'm going to take a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball. Again, I'm a huge fan of the lacrosse ball because it's grippy, but it's also dense enough that you can get into that tissue quite well. What I want to get you to look for here is to take your ball or foam roller of choice. I want to get you to start at the base of your rib cage somewhere. So it doesn't have to be specific, but place the ball right in the middle, and then let it roll off to the same side that you get a stitch. And then all I want you to do is just lie down on top of the ball and just let it gently press in and move the ball up a little bit and down a little bit, and also out to the side a little bit onto the rib cage when you get there, to help you go looking for anything that feels stiff, tight, or tender. Now, with any luck, and the trouble with a stitch is that it's often only present when you're doing exercise. So it may not necessarily be the case that you put a ball through here and you feel it radiate or connect up to the area that you get your stitches. But one of the things that you should hopefully find is that by doing this and then going for a run or doing some exercise, if you're one who gets a consistent stitch, you should hopefully feel like there's a pleasant surprise at how much better that feels. So all I want you to do here is to find a spot that feels a little bit tight, a little bit restricted, potentially tender. Get a sense of how well that ball digs in. Does it feel tight and restricted, or does it feel like it sinks in relatively well? And then what I want to get you to do is compare it to the exact same spot on the other side. Go more for the side that feels a little bit more restricted. Try and allow that ball to dig in through some of that restricted tissue. Take a deep breath in. Squeeze the tissue underneath the ball. And then relax. Really allow any tight muscle around there to give. The breathing obviously helps, particularly if you're on the rib cage. Just helps that tissue, sort of lubricates that movement a little bit more, helps shear away some of that restriction. And then once you've had enough on that one spot, move out a little bit wider again onto the rib, or a little bit further up or down, and go hunting for all of the spots that you feel might be restricted in that specific area. Now, the second part to this is, obviously it may sound strange that if you're having an issue that's generally at the front with a stitch, or more so to the side potentially, that we're treating the back and not that area. So in my experience, the foundation of that, the first step in that dysfunction being there, generally originates at the back. That's where things tend to get a bit stiff and tight. Again, most likely because we tend to slouch a lot. So again, it's no surprise that if you find a spot in your back that is stiff and tight and potentially connected to your stitch, it's very likely that that's the exact same spot that you're hinging through when you sit, doing all the things that you would do day to day without even thinking about it. So it goes without saying that if you're taking the time to free this up, you need to make sure that you're being aware of being up in a taller position. Roll up a towel, jam it into your back so that you're not being allowed to bend and hinge through that spot. But the other thing that we want to do is we also want to address potentially some of the symptoms at the front. So again, taking the same ball, maybe a softer, bigger version of that. So if you have a tennis ball, or if you've got a mini basketball or one of those kids' balls that is relatively soft, we can actually lie down and go hunting around your abdomen for things that feel a little bit tight from the front. So what we can do here, again, just gently let the ball press in. We still want to be very respectful. Again, you're not necessarily going to do any damage to your organs. This is a superficial exercise. We're looking for any tissue right up into that rib cage and underneath that rib cage that might be a little bit tighter than it needs to be because it's responding to what's going on at the back. Same deal as we did with the ball before. We don't want you rolling around on it. Just find a spot that feels tight and restricted. Allow that to just release, just relax onto that. You can lie down if you want to take some of the tension out of it. You can come up onto your elbows to increase the amount of tension in the area. You're putting everything on stretch. It makes it more likely to expose some of that hidden tightness. The other thing we can do is we can tense the muscle that the ball's digging into. Hold it for a few seconds, relax, breathe out, see how that feels. Again, incorporating that breathing is really important. Deep breath in, give it a squeeze, hold that for a couple of seconds. You'll hopefully feel some of that tissue start to give. And then when you relax, the ball will sink in further. It may not feel as tender. So again, go hunting all the way around there for anything that feels tight and restricted. And then hopefully you'll feel like you've removed some of that restriction going forwards. So in my experience, if we're not addressing that underlying spinal/rib cage dysfunction that's hidden until you put it into something like running an exercise, exposes that with a little bit of repetition and force and impact, then we're potentially missing the bigger piece of the puzzle, the biggest piece of the puzzle, that if we fix that, the other things potentially shouldn't be an issue going forward. So again, I genuinely hope that was helpful. The birds are telling me that it's time to stop. Please like and subscribe if you do enjoy this content, but I'll see you in the next one.